Right, OT, we've heard a little bit about it today. There was some training on it yesterday, and it's the world that I quite happily live in and occupy and spend a lot of time in and have some fun in. Let's have a look at that. Day job is as OT Cybersecurity Manager for a global multinational. We were a small New Zealand company doing OT. We've been doing OT since the last century and OT security for a few years now. My background specifically is in controls and automation, so I come from the world of OT and ICS. I was born into it, as opposed to adopting it like many security professionals that are working in OT at the moment. For my sins, I'm a member of ISO 99. I help contribute into the 6443 series, if you're familiar with those documents. Member of the NZITF. I do a few other things on the community side. As I said, I'm a manager now for my sins, which I really enjoy. I think it helps the community, helps my team, and helps especially New Zealand critical and non-critical industrial organisations with their security. I borrowed some of the verbiage from this morning's talk, so I look after a team of Magic class practitioners who help with strategy advisory, GRC roadmap, good, bad and ugly, now, next and later, all those sorts of things. And also the builders, the design and implement fixing things, a lot of OT network intrusion detection deployments at the moment, where we're seeing industrial organisations kind of have a more interesting appetite in looking at what's happening in their OT networks. They've opened up Pandora's ICS and seen what they find, which is a bit of fun. As I said, we're part of a global team, and there's exactly one SANS instructor that is based in New Zealand. That's me. I teach for SANS 515 class for active defence and incident response. The last thing there on intro is avid community supporter. I love education. I love supporting the community, and we've been running OT and ICS security talks since about 2017. and 2019 we started and formalised that into the technical network, which is again about enabling and informing. So some would say that I know what I'm talking about. I do get the Peter Jackson joke, so if you do come up to me afterwards and give me a Peter Jackson pun, that's fine. I'm pretty used to it now. Terms and definitions is kind of aligned to the theme of my talk, and again, being in the Magic class and supporting organisations and helping them understand some of these hard problems. We find that terms and definitions is just one of those things, subjectively and with bias, that we struggle with more in ICS and OT than other disciplines. But regardless of your role, have a think about the terms that you use, have a think about the definitions that you use. Again, I've got my own definitions of what a threat is, what OT is, and especially in our kind of ICS, SCADA, DCS world, we see a lot of different kind of three-letter acronyms and initialisms thrown around. We get into all these nice buzzwords of IIoT and IoT and all the OTs. Having that common lexicon, and it's not just an abbreviation that OT is operational technology, it's this is what we mean when we say this term OT. This is what we mean when we say SCADA. This is what we mean when we say ICS. It's these devices, it's this infrastructure, it's these VLANs, it's these segments. It's just part of our network. And this is our roles and responsibilities here as we kind of converge that. So that's kind of opening up that this is going to be a little bit of a talk on definitions, but I encourage you, regardless of your role in the industry, to think about how you use that, how you define your terms, and not just, as I said, SCADA is supervisory control and data access. This is what we mean. I'll start off with a common view on what operational technology looks like. I remember doing a talk a few years ago as kind of we're living in this post-colonial OT-aware age, and I said, who's heard of OT? And 80% of the hands went up, and I said, who knows what the O and the T stand for? And most of the hands went down, but I feel like in 2024, most people understand that it's operational technology. I like that physical world, that analog world. We deal in the analog world as a comparison to IT or ICT. We are dealing more in the physical world, the digital world. Often made up of industrial control systems. You can see in my, I can't remember if it's a Venn or a Euler diagram there, that a big component of ICS, of OT is ICS. I always find it really interesting sitting down with non-industrial OT organisations, our telcos, for example, they run a lot of non-industrial OT. Most of our financial sector run a lot of non-industrial OT. Pretty much every organisation that has infrastructure or building is running non-industrial OT, that building management. Health OT really scares the bejesus out of me. There's a lot of stuff out there that's really poorly secured, and there's quite an opportunity for, I think, both security and probably bad guys as well around our non-industrial OT. But most of the time, myself and my team, we spend in industrial OT. And again, it's running the plant. I had a great conversation with somebody once that everyone that's working in industrial OT is manufacturing something, manufacturing energy, water, doing transmission, distribution, generation. We're working across manufacturing widgets, pharmaceutical, all those sorts of things, even our transport sectors, manufacturing, transport, which I really like. So again, and it wouldn't be an OT topic without an IT and OT comparison. First and foremost, I really abhor this IT versus OT. I think it creates an unnecessary adversarial paradigm. I think most of our organisations that we work with now are kind of on this convergence journey. I know it's a dirty word to some people, but working collaboratively around those areas of responsibility, and again, that's kind of going to be the theme of my talk today, around understanding who looks after what and what does that look like, because we do have some differences, right? And again, these are stereotypes, they're typical, but from a network perspective, from an endpoint perspective, from a maturity perspective, we've got a lot of differences between what we might see in our corporate enterprise IT network and our industrial OT kind of Purdue-like environment. Again, your results may vary, but again, IT and OT, they're not 100% the same, they're not 100% different, they're somewhere in the middle, and those differences, I think, is where we want to make sure that we understand what the best outcomes can be for organisations in their journey. Most of the time, I consider OT an amorphous blob. Again, we're a service provider organisation. I had a workshop the other day, which I really enjoyed, and it's about kind of 12 different people from across the different cylinders of excellence, because we don't talk about silos, we talk about cylinders of excellence. We had lots of the different cylinders of excellence represented in the room, and it was, of course, the topic was OT, and one of the people said, what is OT? What does OT mean to you? I said, well, I can give you about 17 different definitions for OT, but it's less about what I define OT as, and actually this is about what you, Mr. Practitioner, define OT as, or even your team, but what does your organisation define as OT, and kind of talked about this terms and definitions thing. But for my team, when they come in and start as a baby OT and ICS cybersecurity engineer or consultant, I usually give them this spiel, and OT is an amorphous blob, and it sits in between as a connective tissue, typically IT and ICS, right? That's usually where we're kind of trying to bridge this divide between this IT function that knows a lot about technology and very little about control systems, and this ICS function that knows a lot about their technology and their area of responsibility, and potentially less about good infrastructure and security management. And we're just kind of bring these teams together. I was talking upstairs with Leslie and the team about organisations that we and others have had to introduce their security function and their operations function together. That's not something a third party should have to do, but sometimes we do. Quite often that amorphous blob includes interaction with an ICS vendor. Again, a lot of the legacy and issue and also solution set comes from the vendor space. And our ICS vendors are all on an OT security journey. Some are further than others. Some are far further behind than you'd like them to be. Our IT MSP and MSSP all kind of typically play a role somewhere in the stack. Of course, GRC, when we're looking at that risk piece. And of course, there are no industrial organisations that only have one ICS vendor. Zero. I've seen 90-something%. There's a power company in New Zealand that has about 90% one vendor, but they've got kind of about 5 to 7% on this and this and this and this, these package this and this, turbine this and that, utility system over there. So we're dealing with a lot of different vendors across different things. So it can be a little bit messy, and that's where kind of my usual lens goes. Quite often when we're working with larger organisations, OT ends up being a separate function. As I said, working with those kind of different cylinders of excellence, where that is a centre of excellence and they sit centrally. If they're a parent company, perhaps if they're the global head office or the Auckland head office, they've got some people there and working with multiple business units. Gavin talked a little bit yesterday about architectures, and here we can see a Purdue-like architecture, a Purdue-like model. Again, we won't go down a 6443 zone and conduit. Needless to say, nobody's architecture looks exactly like this, but quite often we find organisations are structuring their program based on kind of this, where IT looks after kind of a Purdue-like 4 and up. Our OT might look after kind of the 3-ish level, and the ICS team look after kind of 2 and below, if you're familiar with the Purdue model. But what I really want to look at is a definition based around our as-a-service model. And we've seen, as I'm sure most of you appreciate, that kind of migration of responsibilities kind of changing from our traditional IT, where you might be responsible for everything, to this as-a-service model, starting with that infrastructure as a service where you offload everything up to the operating system, through to platform as a service and software as a service. Now, please don't get me wrong, I don't think our industrial organisations should all flip to running OT as a service. That's a scary thing as well. But refocusing that core function that we saw in IT to say we don't want to have to worry about bare metal anymore. Our corporate enterprise environments are quite often sitting in a cloud, depending on our philosophies and our requirements. And we can refocus our priorities. Potentially there's cost and time efficiencies if you do it well. And again, focusing on that strategical function while offloading some of the non-core functions, right? That maintenance reliability, you can get your 4.9s, you can get your 5.9s, you can procure some of these things. I actually did one of the first assessments in the region on an organisation that was running their SCADA system in the cloud. Their security team had a hell of a job trying to implement security and a lot of compensating controls, that they were running some SCADA infrastructure in the cloud. There's some New Zealand organisations that are running some of that. You have to understand what that's looking like, and we will see that more in the future. Today it's more of a by exception by the rule, but we can look at shifting of that responsibilities. And this is where we're redefining OT. And as I showed you at the beginning, our conventional OT includes ICS, and this is kind of splits those two functions. What does that look like? It means our OT function looks after that technology and looks after that infrastructure up to the OS layer. Our ICS function look after the application layer, right? Our OT function are looking after underlying technology up to operating system layer, and our ICS function are looking after that application, quite often kind of middleware up. We've found some really interesting outcomes as a result of that. One of those is that our ICS teams, our control system engineers and technicians, right, all of our operational folk, they no longer have to worry about infrastructure. They just get that reliable infrastructure provided by a strong, enabled core team, and they can focus on the application layer. I've seen far too many control system engineers being pulled into having to do patching, being pulled into doing operating system management, being pulled into AD management. But because, of course, we want a separate OT AD from our IT AD, because we're not fools. And, of course, we want that managed appropriately. And I feel that some of those organisations that are out there doing this have those SMEs, those subject matter experts that look after OT in this redefined way from that network stack all the way up to the operating system layer. It does carry risk, and I think for those organisations that have done it, they go through that journey and understand what they're getting themselves in for, but they have a well-resourced team and they understand those end-user requirements. I think for those organisations that bit off more than they could chew, where it was an IT function, not an OT function, didn't think about those recovery mechanisms, their IT team, their help desk team, all of their functions were designed around 8x5 because that's what an IT requirement looks like. All of the user support functions were designed around 8x5 because that's what the IT requirements were. And all of a sudden they're looking after infrastructure that runs 24/7 because that's what many OT environments do. And they didn't think about that support model. So we do want to make sure that if it is offloaded to an IT team or an OT function sitting in an IT team and that cylinder of excellence, because we don't talk about silos, then making sure that's done with an OT mindset is going to provide a lot of return on investment. As I said, there's been a few stories and organisations we've worked with where automation engineers are chasing the vulnerabilities. One thing I'm incredibly passionate about is encouraging organisations to kind of park that OT vulnerability management conversation. It's not going to provide return on investment for your time, effort and energy. It's a nice thing for MSSPs and Big Four consulting to come in and say, OT is all very vulnerable, but actually we don't care about endpoint vulnerabilities. We actually care about safe, secure, reliable operations. And that safe, secure, reliable operations relies on system stability, system resilience, system redundancy, right? When we have our corporate enterprise side, that laptop that I have that sits on my desk, the servers that sit behind it, each of those are systems in and of themselves, right? We're quite a far way down the IT zero trust journey. And so my laptop is, as an asset, as a device, is a system, right? But when I step into OT land, I care about the operations of the distributed control system, DCS, our PLC system, our safety intermittent system, SIS, right? And so necessarily our network vulnerabilities, our zone and conduits, right? Our network architectures, how different practitioners can and cannot access different VLAN segments across our hopefully segmented ICS and OT networks is going to be far more important than, again, chasing vulnerabilities on endpoints. And again, a lot of those are unpatched or unpatchable, but probably patching them creates more risk than it solves, and it's just going to waste our time. Again, our automation engineers chasing the vulnerabilities I've seen far too often because a Big Four consultant said, you've got to come in and patch everything, right? And the organisation didn't have enough maturity to say, no, that's wrong. Anyway, bit of fun and games. I think there is still some organisations have that distrust between IT and OT, IT versus OT adversarial mindset. We still have some organisations that put that firewall in between, an OT managed firewall in between IT and OT, because they think the IT team or know the OT team are running Tenable or Nessus and trying to scan every VLAN segment under the sun, and they're just as likely to trip things. So we have seen some of those. Again, we see less of them in 2024 than we used to, which is quite good. I think most IT practitioners, most IT departments, most CIOs and CISOs understand that OT is different from IT. Again, we live in an OT-aware age. But we do have some of that. Some of the good stories for me out of who's responsible for OT is a CrowdStrike story. So we saw globally on CrowdStrike Friday some organisations that run OT environments that were impacted and severely impacted, right? Delta Airlines famously had their operational technology, they're unable to run their planes, they're unable to have the analog world operating because of that digital failure, and it was a cybersecurity incident, not attack. But either way, we do have CrowdStrike running in some New Zealand OT environments. And I know about those because I've got relationships and I support the community, and my phone was quite busy on Friday and Saturday working with different stakeholders. But you guys might not know who those are because of that resilience and redundancy, and those people that do the mahi, that do the hard work, that had business continuity, that had thought about disaster recovery, that had thought about a bad day, and had belt and braces and had layers of protection, Swiss cheese model, whatever you want to call it, so that it didn't hit the front page of the New Zealand Herald or Stuff or whoever's actually still doing media these days. So I think there are some really good stories about there of organisations running their OT departments and the OT function really well and really reliably, having good resilience, having good enterprise-grade resilience, as opposed to cheap and cheerful resilience, which we can see sometimes. If we're getting into this, and again, for organisations considering going down this journey, we are offloading those OT functions from an ICS team and ICS practitioner. There are definitely some things that you want to consider, and especially if you're thinking about getting into this industry, I think this is where we'll see more and more heading. We need that specific mandate, team mandate for that technology. We need to understand, again, the user requirements, understand what our business requirements are. Again, our crown jewels and our OT and ICS environments are almost certainly going to be dissimilar from our IT and corporate enterprise. Either way, we need to ensure that OT, and of course OT security, is an enabling function. I think it's really easy in security to be a disabling function. It's really easy to be a department of no. It's really easy to say, I'm here to minimize security risk, and so you need to turn off that remote access, you need to patch that vulnerability, we're not deploying that technology, and we're not doing those digitization things, right? But for our function to be valued and enabling and support our business vision, then we need to have that enabling function. We need to have that mindset first and foremost. We need to be resourced. Easier said than done. And again, we've got to have that view on our mission statement being supporting safe, secure, reliable operations. Our mission statement is not to minimise security risk. Our mission statement in OT is to support safe, secure, reliable operations, right? Again, a lot of OT departments or functions are 24/7. Some not so much. We work with some manufacturer organisations that run 6 days. They can catch up, right? They might run 22-hour shifts. Okay, that's cool. We need to make sure that their OT support function has that same support window, that they've got a phone number that's not just going to call into an office that's only manned 40 hours a week. So depending on your sector, whoever's looking after that needs to have that mandate. If that's contracted out, that's in the contract. We've worked with some organisations where they go, oh, we've just got our best efforts. We know that Bob down the road, he's our guy, he's our system integrator, and he's always there when we need him. Actually, no, Bob's on a holiday. I like the conversation that we had earlier today. Less about the hit by a bus or won the lottery, but what if Bob's on a plane and we need to restore safe, reliable operations, right? What if that's supporting the generation? What if that's supporting the grid? What if that's supporting the intertie between the North and the South Island? We need to have a bit more resilience and redundancy, and thankfully most of our critical infrastructure do, which is quite nice. Again, the right training, capabilities, competence. Usually that OT function, that OT security function, needs that right blend from both sides, right? We still find many organisations across New Zealand that have a really good security function. They know quite a lot about security, but very little about OT. We have really good OT people that have been looking after their ugly baby for a long time, and it's kind of sometimes hard to come in and talk about their ugly baby that they've kind of had to sellotape together and glue and sticky tape because they haven't had those conversations at risk, but they don't really understand security. But when you're looking at this kind of OT function, and especially if it's kind of offloaded from that person that's been looking after their network infrastructure for 20, 30 years and it hasn't really been changed since then, making sure you've got that blend, at least a mindset, and quite often the team has that hybrid skill set across the stack, which is quite nice. And that journey, really important, right? Again, security is a journey, not a destination. All those tropes are especially relevant for an OT side. We find an OT cyber steering committee and or OT tabletop. Those are the two things that quite often get an organisational maturity off the ground. We could talk about the SANS ICS 5 critical controls. Maybe it's a different conference talk, but actually starting the conversation is quite important. We do have this kind of history and legacy where automation folk don't necessarily want to tell the IT team about all their shadow OT, but how do we define that? What does good look like? What are different roles and responsibilities, and how can we align on that mission of supporting safe, secure, reliable operations? And have that right accountability, right? Being prepared for a bad day, and looking after systems. I think I've probably got a couple minutes for Q&A. Before I do that, I do want to talk about the technical network. We catch up pretty regularly to talk about this sort of stuff. If you're thinking about getting into ICS and OT, scan my dodgy QR code. We've got online forums. We just ran our summit last week, which was a lot of fun. But it's a great way if you're thinking about getting into ICS and OT, and who doesn't want to get into ICS and OT, to come along, the NZICS Cyber Technical Network. I think I've got time for questions, if there are any questions. I think you're still there. Anyone got any ICS and OT questions? My mic's been on for the last 27 minutes, hasn't it? Good? No? All right, I'll be floating around the next couple of days. Come find me if you like. You can reach out to me, it's my email. Otherwise, enjoy the con. Thanks, guys.
I am a super genius.